Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. I have a question for all of our No Days Off nation today. Are you leading your people? Are you leading your people, or are you managing their opinion of you? Are you leading your people, or are you managing their opinion of you? Clearly, those are two very different things. And I had an experience earlier today in working with a business owner, and it occurred to me this individual isn't leading his people. He was more so managing the opinion that his people had of him. I think it's one of the biggest traps that leaders fall into. They fall into this trap of trying to be what I'm calling the cool boss, the boss that everyone likes, the boss who never creates tension, the boss who always says yes and who avoids difficult conversations, the boss who wants to be seen as super approachable, very understanding, always supportive. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that leaders absolutely should care deeply about their people. I think leaders should be empathetic. I think leaders should build relationships and create environments where people do feel valued. So I'm not saying don't do those things, but somewhere along the way in doing those things, a lot of leaders will cross a line. They stop leading and they really start seeking approval from their people. The problem is that being the cool boss feels good in the moment. When someone, let's say, misses a commitment and you let it slide, what do? Well, you avoid an uncomfortable conversation. That probably feels good in the moment. Or when a team member underperforms and you as the leader do not address it, you end up avoiding conflict. Probably feels better in the moment. When you lower standards because you don't want people upset with you, well, then everyone ends up smiling and moving on, at least temporarily. But leadership is not judged by what happens today. I think that's really, really important to call out. It's not judged by what happens today. Leadership is judged by what happens over time. And over time, the cool boss ends up creating a lot of problems. Think about a team where one person consistently underperforms. Everyone sees it. Everyone knows it. Deadlines are missed. Numbers are not met. Standards aren't met. The work's not getting done. But the leader doesn't address it because they want to be liked. What ends up happening in a scenario like that? Well, the underperformer doesn't improve because nobody is telling them the truth. And the high performers become really frustrated because expectations aren't being enforced equally. As a result, the culture weakens because standards start to become optional. Eventually, the very people the leader was trying to support become the ones who suffer most. One of the most important lessons I think I've learned is this: the more you avoid disappointing people in the short term, the more people you disappoint in the long term. The more you avoid disappointing people in the short term, the more people you disappoint in the long term. I think leadership, at least my experience with it, both in doing it well and doing it poorly, leadership requires a lot of courage. It requires telling people what they need to hear, not just what they want to hear. It requires holding standards even when it's uncomfortable. It requires making decisions that certainly will not always be popular. And there's an irony here. The best employees, they don't actually want a cool boss. I think the best employees want a fair boss. What they really want is clarity. They want consistency. They want accountability. They want to know what winning actually looks like. They want confidence that everyone is being held to the same standard. Nothing frustrates great people more than watching mediocre performance get tolerated indefinitely. In fact, I think many organizations lose their best people while trying to avoid upsetting their weakest people. They're focused on the wrong 20%, is what we would call it. The leader thinks they're preserving harmony. What they're actually doing is creating a lot of resentment. That's what cool bosses end up doing. I often think about leadership the same way I think about parenting kids. If your entire goal as a parent is to be liked by your kids, guess what? You're probably going to make some poor decisions because you're going to avoid consequences. You're going to avoid difficult conversations. You'll avoid short-term discomfort. But the reality is your job as a parent isn't to win a popularity contest. You don't need to be the cool parent. Your job is to prepare your kid for the difficulties that life will certainly have for them down the road. Leadership is not a lot different here. Sometimes helping someone grow requires discomfort. Sometimes caring about people means actually holding them accountable. A lot of times, the most compassionate thing you could do is tell someone the truth. Now, if you're listening here and you're thinking, hey, Brian, I don't manage a team. I don't have a bunch of people around me. That's good. I think this lesson still applies because for those solopreneurs out there, the individuals that have yet to build a team or company, oftentimes they make the exact same mistake. What do I mean? The difference is that they're just trying to be the cool boss to themselves. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow. You'll let yourself skip the prospecting. You negotiate with your commitments. You move deadlines. You lower standards. You give yourself permission to avoid doing the hard things. And just like the weak leaders I was describing, you create a weak culture. Weak self-leadership ends up creating weak results. The truth is that every one of us is managing somebody. We're either managing a team or we're managing ourselves. And I think the leadership principles apply to both. So the standards matter, accountability matters, consistency matters. Doing what needs to be done matters. So here's what I want you thinking about today. I want you to ask yourself this question. Where am I choosing approval over leadership? Where am I choosing approval over leadership? Is it a conversation you've been avoiding? Is it a standard that maybe you stopped enforcing? Is it feedback someone really, really needs to hear? What I want you to do is identify it, and I want you to address it. I want you to start leading in this particular area today. Because your job is not to be the cool boss. Your job is not to be everyone's friend. Your job is to help people win. And sometimes the people who help us win aren't the people who make us comfortable. They're the people who care enough to hold the standard. The cool boss seeks approval. The leader seeks growth. One of those feels better today. The other creates a better future. I think that if you're listening to the No Days Off podcast, you're probably one that chooses the future. That's all I have for you today, the No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.